We're going to talk about other ways of expanding our coastal economy with our panel here, and I'm going to go to them each in turn. So the first person I'm going to turn to here is Fiona Monahan, and Fiona is head of the Wild Atlantic Way programme at Fáilte Ireland, which has been at the heart of developing a range of tourism experiences along the coast. So Fiona, how you're adding to the coastal economy?
Thank you, Olivia. Well, Fáilte Ireland developed the Wild Atlantic Way out of necessity, and the main reason was that international tourism to the west of Ireland was in decline. And this was masked for a number of years when things were very buoyant here in Ireland in the early noughties, and Irish people had more disposable income and were taking more short breaks. But when the world fell apart in 2008 and we in Fáilte looked at the challenges facing our industry, it became very apparent that overseas visitors had been in decline for a number of years. And the impact of this was most felt along the western seaboard. At the same time, the country was plunged into recession. There was less money to go around. We had less staff available to us. So we had to look at how we did things differently and more efficiently. So we looked at presenting the whole west of Ireland as a single proposition that would be motivating and compelling to overseas visitors. And this was no mean feat when we looked at who the agencies were that had responsibility for the jurisdiction. So the first thing we did was developed a very collaborative process with the 10 local authority jurisdictions responsible for the 9 coastal counties. And that partnership has extended to today, and we've added to it in terms of Údarás na Gaeltachta, the local development companies, and everybody who has a role to play in developing both tourism and industry on the western seaboard. So what we really have is a repackaging and a positioning of the west of Ireland as a tourism product of scale to get cut through, singularity, with the Atlantic being the common denominator, that is both compelling and inviting. And when visitors come here, we have the opportunity then to present them with our traditional culture and experiences in music, dance, visitor attractions. Again, our food is a huge component of a visitor experience, and I'm delighted to say that in our recent visitor attitude surveys, the expectation of food has been increasing year on year, with visitors' expectations being exceeded, and the fish producers and the ability to eat locally sourced and produced food has added considerably to this. So while the Wild Atlantic Way is only 3 years in existence, it's very much in its infancy in terms of a brand. Our focus now is on developing great visitor experiences. So once visitors are attracted by this coastal proposition, what are they going to do when they come here? How can we get them to come back time and time again? And how can we get them to explore different locations along the west coast? It's as much a visitor proposition for Irish visitors as it is for overseas visitors. And we're hoping that more people will consider taking short breaks in different parts of the West Coast. I'm sure we all have our favourite spots that we went to on family holidays as children. We're not asking people to change their habits, we're just asking them to embrace the Wild Atlantic Way of life and consider visiting more locations. And we're working very closely with tourism providers and with communities to develop new experiences off the beaten track to really contribute to the social and economic contribution of these areas through tourism.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And Robert McCabe, who's on my left here, is Director of Operations and Navigational Services at Irish Lights. So, Robert, what you can do to expand the coastal economy?
Thanks, Olivia. There's a couple of slides should pop up on the backdrop there, but they're not that critical in any event. I can't see it. There we go.
There you go.
There's always the technology. So if we can get it on to the next one, maybe. There we go. The slides are primarily to give a backdrop. Our Irish Lights is a maritime safety organisation. That's our statutory role, and we provide aids to navigation and associated services around the entire coast of Ireland, both the north and south. And in doing that, we would always, I suppose, over the years have felt we made a direct contribution to the coastal economy because we keep the coast safe, and that's in terms of the safety of life, of people, the safety of property, maintaining the environment, and indeed facilitating commerce. And that's, I suppose, is how our core statutory role would assist with the coastal economy. And we've been 200 years or more on the coast. It depends on how you count it. I can count it back to the 5th century if I'm trying to say we've the oldest working lighthouse in the world, and I can count it from 1810 if we're looking at the name Irish Lights. So well over 200 years on the coast, and through many of those years, we contributed to the coastal economy in a very direct way. We were the people who hired the horse and cart to bring our keepers from the lighthouse down to church. And if I go back through the files in my office, I can see references to complaints about the quality of the horse, and we need to invest a bit more in the horse and cart. So we have always contributed directly to the economy, and people often associate Irish Lights with Dún Laoghaire because that's where our headquarters is. And I always dispel that. I say, no, Irish Lights is on the coast. It's in the lighthouses, in the beacons, in the buoys off the coast. And Dún Laoghaire is just there to serve that. Irish Lights is a coastal organisation, and our roots are in contributing to the coastal economy. In more recent times, I think technology has been the key to unlocking that contribution to the coastal economy. And I suppose it relates a little bit to a point that Dan O'Brien made in the previous session about how we shouldn't fool ourselves as to how good we have been in developing the coastal economy. There's a lot more to do there. And I think in recent years, Irish Lights have embraced that. And technology allows us to improve the service we give as that core statutory service. So the advent of light-emitting diode lights, of improved batteries, of improved solar energy and solar panels has allowed us to consolidate a lot of our lighthouse stations. So that lets us give an improved service in terms of the quality of the service, a much more reliable service, helps us reduce our own costs, and helps us then, and parallel with it, to provide new electronic systems that again improve safety on the coast. But because our requirements on the stations for our core business have changed, it frees up quite a lot of the property on these stations. So where in the past you might have had 3 houses for lighthouse keepers and their families, our core business has now retreated to the tower effectively. So there's a lot of excess property there that we want to find alternative uses for. So in recent years, one of the real success stories we would believe, and I'm very much aligned with what Fiona is doing on the Wild Atlantic Way, has been the Great Lighthouses of Ireland. So Great Lighthouses of Ireland is a brand that we adopted, that Irish Lights own, but really Great Lighthouses of Ireland is working with existing operators and coastal communities, again back to where our roots are. So if you can see the slide that's up at the moment, you can see the 12 properties. And while it's a single brand, every one of those properties is unique. Now, some of them offer accommodation, some of them offer interpretation and tours, and people can experience what the lighthouse life was like. I suppose the original of these might have been Hook Head, where very large numbers of people are visiting. But you can look at any one of those, and there's a unique experience there, and it's an all-island brand. So the closest ones to here, I suppose, Clare Island and Loop Head. We saw earlier some lovely footage of the coast. And if you take that ferry out to Clare Island, and my wife teaches in this area, she was out there a couple of weeks ago, 6 dolphins following the ferry out on a beautiful summer's day out to Clare Island, and walk up to that lighthouse and spend a couple of nights there with the best of the seafood that Jim's organisation promote. I mean, where in the world will you get that experience? And that's part of our contribution back to the coastal economy, because we are an organisation of the coast. And this brand will grow. We don't intend to grow it too quickly. We want the new stations to develop, but we have other stations that we will look at bringing onto it. And it is a partnership. So in Fanad, it's a partnership with the community organisation. In Fanad, backed by the County Council, but working with the community organisation. For a lot of the accommodation ones, it's a cooperation with the Landmark Trust, who have a very strong role in preserving historic buildings. If you go up to Rathlin Island, it's the Royal Society for Protection of Birds. As I say, if you go down to Hook Head, it's Hook Heritage. But if you go to Ballycotton, it's Ballycotton Island Tours, giving you a unique experience going out on a boat to a lighthouse island. That's and it helps us preserve our heritage. Our heritage is really important to us. I suppose that's the non-technical bit, and if I take 2 seconds to do the technical bit, I can feel the chairman.
2 seconds.
On the technical side, because we have the stations, because we have the buoys and the lighthouses and the beacons, we can use those now, because of new technology, to bring back data and communications from the stations. So at the moment, what we're doing is using sensors to bring back, I'll talk about the light later if I get a chance, is to bring back wind speed and direction, sea state, sea temperature, But the potential to do much more of that is there. And because we live in a modern world, we push that out on Twitter as well as everything else. So our stations are talking to new users in that way.
Okay,
Thank you, Chairman,
Robert, thank you very much. And the next person on our panel is Jim Gannon, who's CEO of Sustain. I'm not ignoring Dan, but we've already heard from Dan. That's why I'm passing over Dan. Jim Gannon, the CEO of Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And in his career, Jim has delivered projects at European, national and regional level. So, Jim, how we can expand the coastal economy?
Thanks, Olivia. I'm just going to make a point that we're in the presence of surfing royalty here today, because Dr. Easkey Britton is in the audience, and my understanding, at least I think it's either 4 or 5 times she's been Irish surfing champion while getting her doctorate. And separately, the previous generation of Britons are one of the reasons that surfing is here in the first place. And we have a nice little industry indeed from that, whether it's big wave surfing off the Cliffs Moher or teaching kids up in Tullin and Rossnella. So worth noting. Yeah. I think for our part, we are central to the delivery of the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan. And that looks at planning, looks at technology, looks at industry, and looks at the social aspects as well of how we harness some of the value that's there in the ocean. I think some of the perspectives we've heard today are really important to that. It's a balanced view being taken, a bit of pragmatism, lessons learned, Ger, in particular. It's very, very valuable as we transition to that. We're undergoing a midterm review now, which is timely. And I think it's worth taking all of these views and perspectives on board, and that's what's being undertaken. I think a separate part of what we do is we fund some of the test sites we have. So whether it's the Lear Centre in University College Cork, or the Galway-based site at 1/4 scale, or developing a full-scale test site up in Amets in Mayo, we're developing these things, these pieces of infrastructure, so that the supply chain is there here in Ireland for technologies to develop, such as open hydro, which we would have funded at an early stage, the OE Buoy, which is shortly going to full-scale testing in Hawaii, or Sea Power, which has just recently come back into shore from being tested in the Galway Bay test site. These are pieces of infrastructure that are very, very important. We also run the prototype fund that has given about 13 million to about 85 projects over the past few years, bringing them through these technology maturity or TRL levels. I think a couple of things that are quite important to me are this perspective on sharing and collaboration. So we've set up recently with the Scottish and Northern Irish governments the Open Network, Offshore Power Innovation Network. And it's to focus on the industry, the startups, and how we can learn from the oil and gas sector, who we had in at the last meeting, to say how in terms of technology, in terms of robustness of engineering, in terms of finance, in terms of interacting with social communities, what lessons are there to be learned? How can we transition supply chains and transform them, I suppose, into addressing a different type of energy from the sea? This becomes more important as we face into the impacts of the election of Donald Trump and also Brexit, in that the climate target is shifting, not the 2050 target or the 2030 target, but the goal we're heading towards is shifting slightly. And it's more important that we underline international collaboration now more than ever, in that through whatever hot or cold war or 40-year life cycle of a European project has taken place before, trade continues, science continues, energy continues to be needed. So we need to cut across some of that and say collaboration is still very important and key. I'm going to shift quickly towards the more social side. I think a lesson that we've learned, not from our ocean energy works to date, but another piece of work is the Sustainable Energy Communities Project, where we give people mentoring support and we give them funding to determine their own master plan for their community. Literally, they decide what they want to do to address the climate challenge. And because of that, they develop a sense of awareness around things, that the fact that they have a flat screen TV and a telephone and an iPad, they create a need for wind farms or power stations or transmission lines. And they start realizing that instead of infrastructure being passive, where it's only if something goes wrong or we need more of it, they appreciate it, and usually in a negative way. We get active value from these things all of the time. And recognizing the active creation of value of infrastructure to us is really important, especially as we look at new geographical areas like the sea. So it's a matter of sitting down early through the Offshore Renewable Energy Development Plan, through the spatial planning processes, the national planning framework, to look at some of these aspects and involve people at that stage of the dialogue, as opposed to it being at a statutory process stage where people feel like it's come upon them quite quickly. So interaction with local communities and dialogue as early as possible at the policy stage, very, very important.
Okay, well, if I can pick up actually from the point that Jim was making there and throw this out to the two Jims, Jim OToole and Jim Gannon, it would seem to me that one of the really big areas potentially for the creation of industry business jobs along the coast is aquaculture, which has obviously got to be the growth area in terms of fish, and renewable energy. And yet, in both of these cases, one is coming up against planning delays and difficulties, number one, and number two, community resistance. So what's your answer in terms of changing the sort of planning structures that would make these things more straightforward? But number two, and maybe even more important, evangelizing for these industries, which, if they are sustainable, and of course one wants them to be sustainable, will actually create an anchor for these coastal communities. Jim?
I think it's a very pertinent point that you raise. Recently, in the past couple of weeks, there has been an independent aquaculture license review group report published, and there are some recommendations in that are designed to expedite the aquaculture licensing process. And that is a report that has been developed with a lot of consultation. So I think there is a very firm intent to try and improve the process and to expedite it. And I think the second point is that you touched about the acceptance of coastal communities of aquaculture. And I think from my perspective, when we talk about clean food production and sustainable food production, it falls very much in that into that camp. But we had our BIM national conference yesterday, and a very interesting presentation from a representative from the EU Commission, who was talking about EU funding and an EU program promoting aquaculture around Europe, and some very innovative ways in how, in Spain was the example that was cited, where the Commission have supported initiatives whereby Spanish communities through schools have educated communities about aquaculture. And Gilles Doignan was the name of the gentleman, and he showed a very amusing video at the start where he was showing the school play, and it was about farmed in Europe. And when the aquaculture characters came onto the stage, the music stopped because they're not farmed. So there's a huge education process to be done with the public to get them to understand what aquaculture is, to demonstrate the benefits of it, and to demonstrate the fact that if we are, as we have spoken already in the conference about growing population, need for extra food production, to do that in a sustainable way, that aquaculture has a really important part to play in that. And that the coastline that we have in Ireland is very conducive to doing that. So there is a big job to be done in promoting it. And if I can bring it into what I talked about on Taste the Atlantic, in terms of linking product and place and person, that is part of that process also.
That's part of that process. But just what about the straightforward cow on the line, which is often planning delays at civil service level? I mean, what can we do to expedite that?
Well, as I said, the Aquaculture License Review Group has addressed that and set out recommendations, and there's a commitment to address those. But some of those delays occur because there is opposition from various interest groups. So I think it would be unfair to blame it on a bureaucratic delay when there is a civic delay, if you like. A civic delay
as well. Jim, particularly in the whole area of renewable energy, and there is constant opposition to wind farms, I think, in particular, and you'll know of other areas as well. So, I mean, if indeed these are safe technologies and are going to be of benefit and be sustainable in the areas, how do you evangelize? How do you persuade people to embrace them?
I think part of it is shifting from a position of lecturing, dictating, and perhaps evangelizing to one of informing people, empowering them, just saying, these are the facts, you decide. We still import over 70% of the energy we use on this island. The only reason it's down from 88% last year is because the Corrib gas pipeline came on and we got gas from the Corrib field. So it's a matter of making sure that people understand and helping to bring them along with that story, as opposed to, again, perhaps pontificating. I think at the same time we need to implore a bit of pragmatism on the part of the local communities, in that people will often talk about preserving something as opposed to conserving. So if you talk about preserving something, you're talking about taking a picture, putting it into a formaldehyde jar and leaving it there. So at what point did you get to that picture? Was it before we moved from the ass and cart out to the lighthouses to a petrol-engined car? Was it when we moved out of the Curragh and the Galway hooker into a trawler with heavy fuel oil and diesel? At what point do you bring that preservation in? That's what perfect looks like. Or is it pragmatism to say, we need energy, we need to become more self-sufficient, we need to conserve as we harness some of these? So I think, generally speaking, there needs to be more pragmatic behaviour and just more rational dialogue from both sides. I think one of the processes we're facing into now, or one of the things that we will face shortly, is publication of a marine licensing bill. And what is really important in that is that there is clarity around the process for developers, for people in the finance world, for local communities, and that expectation is set. How long is this likely to take?
Yeah.
What are the commitments there? How influential can my voice really be? As one letter of 500, or as one letter where the scientists and engineers and socioeconomists will have a look? So clarity and expectation setting are important. So a rational dialogue is what we need. Evangelizing on either ends of the spectrum, saying stop everything now, or this is the way of the future, I don't think it's going to cut it anymore.
It's not the way to do it. Dan, just turning quickly to you, I mean, the great thing about so many of these industries is that in areas which would find it hard to attract inward investment otherwise, these are industries that are based in the sea. They are local. They're not going to move. That's where they have to be. So, do you often look and despair at the extent to which so many barricades are thrown up along the way to the development of these, which are future industries?
Well, again, to pick up on Jim's, I'm not sure whether it's a barrier to people doing things, or whether there just isn't the ideas coming up from the bottom. So there's certainly a problem with ideas coming up. Could I just come back to the aquaculture thing? I heard a statistic at a conference a couple of years ago that Norway produces 100 times more farmed salmon than we do. Now, I haven't been able to verify that. I'm sure somebody here knows. But what I do know for certain is that over the past 30 years, all of the increase in global fish has come from farmed. The amount of captured fish has stayed stable over 3 decades, and that's despite the world population increasing by about 3 billion people over that time. So a lot more mouths to feed. We're not catching any more. The reason for that is the fish just aren't there. There's more and more of global fish stocks are under pressure. So where's the growth opportunity? It's very much in the aquaculture area. And I think Jim mentioned that 63% of our fisheries is captured. The global average now is about 50%. So there's we're even below the average globally. The B word, Brexit, another issue for the whole fishery space. The European Parliament did a report recently on how other countries, EU27, are fish in UK waters. More than a quarter of the fish landed in Ireland come from UK waters, which is a very high level. If Britain withdraws from the common fisheries policy, as looks extremely likely, there are all sorts of issues around access to that British waters, and vice versa. Of course, there's both sides to it. But that would seem to me to be a threat to the industry that I haven't heard mentioned today. I'm sure it has been mentioned, but I just thought it was worth mentioning.
It did come up last year, and there was a representative here from the English Fishermen's Organisation. And I remember the feeling among the representatives of both fishermen's organisations at the time was the determination that they had had a long relationship of cooperation in these waters, and that no matter what happened with Brexit, that would continue. Now, how much of that is wishful thinking when it comes down to the law, I don't know. But the fishermen certainly hoped they could get around it. Fiona, if I can just turn quickly to you. The Wild Atlantic Way. In the end, when you think about it, the Wild Atlantic Way was a wonderful bit of branding, lots of signposts, decent maps, and giving people connected activities to do up along the way. In a way, it was terribly simple, the whole idea, wasn't it?
And that's the success of it, was its simplicity. But what it has done, it has given small tourism businesses the confidence to either expand, diversify, or new entrants to come into the tourism space. The investment has gone into the infrastructure, as you've said, and also the promotion. So it's minimising the risk and the barriers to entry into the industry, thereby allowing people to sustain livelihoods, to grow the economic benefit for coastal communities, create new jobs. We've heard about allowing, I think, people to come back to the areas that they grew up in and to raise their own families. So it's making a positive contribution and making it simpler. In the middle of the recession, we saw a number of people who had lost their jobs and had no choice but to start up their own roles in areas of their passion. So there's a gentleman down in Kerry, Wild Water Adventures, who found himself and his wife unemployed with 5 children to feed. What did he knew? He knew swimming, he knew snorkeling, he knew coasteering. So he's now running a very successful business in that area. However, there are challenges to the season in terms of extending the season out into the shoulders. The tourism season in many coastal communities is literally July and August, the school holidays. Yeah. So we're working with businesses to see how they can understand the cost of doing business and helping them to present ideas that will allow them to stay open longer and better business practices and informed practices. And again, it's all down to collaboration and cooperation both within communities and across communities.
Yeah, but what you did was you told a story. I mean, that's effectively what you really did, and it made such a difference. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you so much to our panel.